blend that Connor created. Actually, this is my Moxie mom, my spirit mom. Connor, you saw her quote this morning. And over 20 years ago, Connor created a women's ceremony called Long Dance. And at that ceremony, more than 50 women gather in the wilderness, and we create a purification ceremony and dance our prayers all night long around the fire.
Yeah.
Beautiful ceremony. And
The Women's Way Long Dance, the vision for that came to me in 1984 when I was living on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. My son had just been born. He was 6 months old. My husband Kurt was in charge of the river corridor there. We were part of that residential community. My husband's work has been with the National Park Service. So we were required to live in this community on the South Rim.
Is he like a forest ranger or?
Park ranger.
Park ranger, okay.
Well, his career's been a park ranger. He's currently the superintendent of Joshua Tree National Park, which means in the corporate world he would be the CEO. So he runs the park. He's responsible for that in that system of management. At the time, on that South Rim, he was in charge of what's known as the river corridor. And that's, 225 miles approximately inside the national park, the river itself, the management of the river, all activities, whether it's research or running the river. And of course that's where I fell in love with running the river, which later became my all-women's river trips. But as far as long dance, right after I came back from my solo Himalayan trek, 6 months after that, I went to Salt Lake City. That was 1982. I went to study with Jean Houston. And I met a man who was then working, who was an assistant of Jean's, Charles Lawrence. And Charles had been traveling and teaching with Jean for 10 years. Well, he and I had this electric connection, not romantically, but as a brother and sister, really. And later, by 1984, Charles and I had decided to do a gathering on the south rim of Grand Canyon National Park, which was to be a long dance. And it was a weekend gathering. And it was through Charles that I met Carolyn Tawangima, who was a Hopi elder that I spent time with, that I met Wallace and Gracie Black Elk, Lakota Sioux elders that came and ran the sweat lodges at that gathering, and Vincent Mum Stogan that came and oversaw the all-night dance. So the elders of all these traditions, I got permission from the then superintendent, Richard Marks, to use what's now known as the Kolb Studio. It's a museum and art studio. The Kolb brothers, which are two men that are very famous in Grand Canyon history. They had a studio that was literally built on the edge of the canyon. It was closed to the public because it was to be renovated. It was safe, but we were allowed to use it as our kiva to do our all-night dances and ceremonies. And then he gave me permission, as long as I promised him I would never ask again, to build a sweat lodge inside the park. And it was because a traditional elder was overseeing it, Wallace Black Elk. He and his wife Gracie came. And so we did this 3-day long dance. 65 people came from all over the United States. And we did purification, we did intentions, we drummed and danced our prayers all night in this Kolb studio. They heard us in Bright Angel Campground in the bottom of Grand Canyon. It's become kind of legendary there in the 80s. And I decided then, I said to myself, I wonder what this would be like to do a gathering like this with just women.